In a shoebox at the back of a Paris apartment, someone had kept a single photograph of Edith Piaf that told a different story than the one the world had agreed to remember. It was not a stage photograph. There were no lights, no crowd, no microphone raised toward that small, unmistakable face. It showed her sitting sideways on a wooden chair in a narrow corridor, one shoe off, her head tilted back against the wall, and she was laughing. Not performing a laugh, laughing the way a person laughs when they have forgotten, for a few seconds, that anyone is watching. For 40 years, no one outside that apartment ever saw it, and the man who took it had a reason for that. The apartment belonged to a photographer's assistant named Robert, though almost no one who admired Piaf ever knew his name. In the winter of 1961, he was 23 years old, and he had been sent to the Olympia in Paris to carry equipment, load film, and stay out of the way. That was the entire job: carry, load, and stay out of the way. The Olympia in those months was not an ordinary theater. It had become something closer to a place people went to witness whether a woman could still stand. Because by 1961, everyone in Paris knew the truth that no one said out loud. Edith Piaf was ill. Her body had been worn down by years that would have ended most people much earlier. She was thin in a way that frightened the people around her. There were nights the theater staff were not certain she would make it from the dressing room to the stage. And yet she kept booking the Olympia. She kept singing. The whole city seemed to be holding a single question in its hands, like a fragile glass. How many more times? That winter, the Olympia had become the center of it all. She had come back to that stage when a great many people, including some who loved her, believed she should rest, should stop, should let the legend close quietly while there was still dignity in it. She refused. There was a new song in those nights, a defiant, upward-climbing thing about regretting nothing, and audiences left the theater shaken by it, because they understood they were watching a woman use the last of her strength on purpose, in public, as a kind of statement. The management worried about her. The doctors worried about her. The newspapers counted her performances the way people count the breaths of someone they are about to lose. And still, every night, the seats filled, and every night the corridor behind the dressing rooms filled with people whose only job was to get her from a chair to a spotlight without letting the audience see how heavy the journey had become. Robert had been warned about all of it before he ever arrived. The older men who ran the cameras had told him the rules of the place in low voices. You do not photograph her arriving. You do not photograph her leaving. You do not photograph her resting. You photograph the performance, and nothing else, because the performance is what she has agreed to give, and everything around it belongs to her. He had nodded and promised, the way a young man promises things he does not yet understand. He understood now. He was standing inside exactly the moment he had been told never to look at. That was the story the world agreed to remember. The dying voice of Paris singing against the end. The tragic figure in the simple black dress pouring out everything she had left. It was true, and it was powerful, and it sold every seat in the house. But it was not the whole of her, and Robert, standing in a corridor with a camera he was not supposed to be using, saw the part that got left out. He had wandered away from the older photographers, the important ones with the good positions. He was looking for a quiet place to reload film. The corridor behind the dressing rooms was supposed to be empty an hour before the show. It was not. Edith Piaf was there, alone, sitting sideways on a plain wooden chair, and at first Robert froze because he thought something was wrong. Her head was back against the wall. Her eyes were closed. One small shoe was off, sitting on the floor beside her tired foot. She looked, for a moment, like a woman who had run out of everything. Then a stagehand passed and said something to her, some small, ordinary joke, the kind of thing people say to fill a corridor. And Robert watched the whole tired figure change. Her eyes opened, her mouth opened, and she laughed, fully, helplessly, one hand coming up to her chest, her head tipping further back against the wall. It was loud. It was unguarded. It was nothing like the sorrow the audience had bought tickets to feel. And without deciding to, without thinking about whether he was allowed, Robert lifted the camera and pressed the shutter once. The sound of the shutter was small, but she heard it. She turned her head and looked straight at him. And here is the moment Robert described for the rest of his life to almost no one. He expected anger. He expected to be reported, thrown out, marched to the manager who had told him 100 times to stay out of the way. Piaf was known to be sharp with people who crossed a line. She had every reason, an hour before a performance she might not survive, to be furious at a stranger who had stolen a private second. She was not furious. She looked at him for a long moment, this frightened boy holding a camera he had no permission to hold. Then she smiled, a smaller smile than the laugh, a knowing one. And she said, quietly, something Robert would repeat only to the people closest to him. She said, "Keep it, but not for them." She gestured, a small, tired motion of her hand toward the direction of the stage, toward the theater, toward the thousands of people waiting to watch her suffer beautifully. "Not for them," she said. "They want the sad one. Keep the other one for yourself." Then she put her shoe back on, stood up, and became again the woman Paris was waiting for. An hour later, she walked onto the Olympia stage and sang as though her life were ending in front of them. And in a way it was. And the audience wept and rose to their feet, and no one in that theater had any idea that an hour earlier, the same woman had been laughing so hard she had to hold her own chest. That was exactly how she wanted it. To understand why that instruction mattered so much, you have to understand what Edith Piaf had learned about the world long before she was famous. She had come up from the streets of Paris, from a childhood that had almost nothing soft in it. She had learned very young that the world was generous with attention and stingy with mercy, and that people would love you enormously as long as you gave them the version of yourself they had come to see. She understood her audience better than any of the critics who wrote about her. She knew they did not only want her voice, they wanted her wound. They wanted to watch a small, suffering woman transform pain into something they could feel from the safety of their seats. And she gave it to them, willingly, night after night, because it was the truest gift she had. Her sorrow on that stage was not a costume. It was real. But she had made a decision somewhere along the way, a decision that most people never guessed. She would give the world her sorrow. She would not give the world her joy. Her joy she kept. Her laughter she kept. The ordinary human happiness of a woman laughing in a corridor with one shoe off, that belonged to no audience, no critic, no camera meant for the public. That was the part of herself she refused to sell. And a 23-year-old assistant had accidentally photographed the one thing she guarded most. People who worked beside her in those years said the same thing again and again in different words. Away from the stage, she was quick, funny, mischievous, exhausting to keep up with. She teased the musicians. She mimicked the important men who came to flatter her. She laughed at her own bad luck harder than anyone. The frailty was real, and the humor was real, and they lived in the same small body at the same time, and the audience was only ever shown one of them. This was not deceit. It was a kind of discipline, maybe the last discipline she had left. A woman who had been given very little privacy in her life had found the one room the public could not enter, and she guarded its door. The stage got her tears, the corridor got her laugh, and she decided every single night which door to open. That is what makes the smaller smile so important. The one she gave Robert after the shutter clicked. She was not smiling because she had been caught. She was smiling because she had just made a decision about a stranger. In the space of a breath, an hour before walking out to perhaps the hardest thing she would do all week, she had chosen to trust a frightened boy with the one image of herself she had spent a lifetime protecting. She could have demanded the film. She could have had him removed. Instead, she gave him an instruction and a trust, and then she stood up and went back to work. Robert kept his promise. He developed the photograph himself, quietly, telling no one. He did not sell it, though there were years when he badly needed money, and a single unseen photograph of Edith Piaf laughing would have been worth more than he made in months. He did not submit it to the magazines that would have printed it on their covers within a week. He put it in a shoebox at the back of a closet, and he kept it there. And the world went on remembering Edith Piaf exactly the way she had allowed herself to be remembered. The sorrowful genius, the dying sparrow, the voice that broke and would not stop. She died in 1963, not long after those Olympia nights, and the legend closed over her like water. The photographs that survived were the ones she had chosen to allow: the black dress, the raised hands, the closed eyes, the anguish made beautiful. That was the Piaf the world kept. And in a shoebox in an ordinary apartment, growing older year by year, there was another one nobody knew existed. A woman laughing with her head against a wall, kept by a man who had promised to keep her secret, and did. Robert grew old. He never became famous. He carried other men's equipment for most of his career and took his own quiet photographs on the side. And the single most extraordinary image he ever made sat in a box where no one could see it. When people asked him, late in his life, whether he had ever photographed anyone truly great, he would sometimes go still for a moment. And then he would say, "No, not really," and change the subject. He was keeping the promise even then. Not for them. It was only after he died, 40 years after that winter at the Olympia, that his family opened the shoebox and found it. A single photograph. On the back, in faded pencil, 4 words in his handwriting. Not for them. Elle riait. She was laughing. And the people who found it stood in that apartment holding a piece of Edith Piaf that the entire 20th century had never seen, and they understood, slowly, what they were holding. Not a scandal, not a secret affair or a hidden shame. Something far rarer than that. They were holding proof that the saddest woman in the history of French song had also, when no one was allowed to watch, been happy. And that is the part the legend left out. We remember Edith Piaf for her sorrow because she chose to give us her sorrow, and it was a magnificent, world-changing gift. But a gift is a thing given, which means there was a giver, a whole living person who decided what to hand over and what to keep. The tragedy was real. The dying was real. But so was the laughter in the corridor, the shoe on the floor, the head tipped back against the wall. She had more than one truth in her, and she was careful, to the very end, about which ones the world was allowed to own. The photograph hangs framed now in the home of the family that found it. Small, ordinary, a woman laughing. And every person who has ever stood in front of it has had the same strange feeling. The feeling of meeting someone they were sure they already knew and realizing they had only ever seen the face she chose to show. She kept the other one for herself for 40 years, exactly as she asked. And now, at last, we are allowed to see it too, and to understand that the voice of Paris was not only sorrow. It was a woman who guarded her own joy so fiercely that she hid it in a corridor, handed it to a stranger, and trusted him to keep it safe until the world was finally ready to be gentle with it.